But David, this story about housing zones. So we've seen 10 suburbs around metropolitan Melbourne that have been designated as a potential place for development. Now, they include suburbs that might be known around the country: Doncaster, Camberwell, I believe, is one, Chadstone, down in Frankston is one as well.
Yeah.
Around the country, state governments are sort of grappling with trying to get more housing in. Is this the best way of going about it?
Well, there's a couple of things here, Simon. Doing some sneaky reforms over Easter to open up planning zones. We're not going to build more homes. Our biggest issue is the cost when it comes to construction in terms of both labour, materials and taxation. I mean, I talk to so many people at the moment, and land tax and stamp duty is absolutely smashing people. We're the highest taxed nation in the nation when it comes to housing. So people just aren't building them. So we've got to get confidence to actually people wanting to build housing. And then the next part of that question is, where's the appropriate place to build them? And we need a good spread. So I look at the outer suburbs where there is a lot of housing going in, 40% of housing, and people are moving to the outer suburbs, but there's no infrastructure to go with that. So we've got to get this right. I don't think people just want to go upwards. And what the government's done with these reforms that have come in over Easter is they've done them in such a way where they're taking away third-party rights. So people that might be living in a suburb with nice amenity, livability, are now potentially going to have a sky tower in their backyard.
In Sydney, we've seen the Rose Hill racecourse be designated by Chris Minns as a potential housing area. There's a debate in Melbourne about whether that could happen at Sandown Racecourse in Melbourne Southeast, which I know is a little bit further out from your electorate.
Yeah.
How else do you do it, though? If you don't go up in these suburbs, which, you know, some of them are near your electorate, how else do you do it?
Yeah, look, there's got to be more flexibility in our planning laws, no doubt. The regulation is absolutely strangling as part of the reason why you're not getting investment. This has to be private sector led, but you know, there are things that New South Wales did years ago which allowed dulocks to come on board instantly, where you can take a single dwelling and have a second house and effectively do that without the whole planning and regs to go with it.
A lot of that happens in Melbourne, though, already.
Well, only started to happen now, but you've still got councils that are stopping that from happening.
Right.
So there are things that you could do in a planning reform that would literally double a lot of housing stock overnight if it was done better. And I've got no problems with 3, 4 stories in a lot of places, but I know, say in my area of Elsternwick, we've got huge density already, and I don't think a lot of Melburnians want to be living in 16-storey towers similar to, you know, the likes of Asia, when they like the kind of that type of livability that Melbourne has always brought it. So we've got to get this right. And the last thing I think that's really important to all of this is if you look at what the government's aim is around, say, the suburban rail loop, where again what they're doing is they're building these 2-kilometre planning zones where anyone that lives around those suburban rail loop precincts effectively has no appeal rights. And you could have a sky tower in your backyard, and people are thinking that they're going to be able to get a value capture or uplift from their house, but it's actually going to do the opposite.
Now, this week, the opposition unveiled a new policy where you're essentially bringing back a state construction watchdog.
Yeah.
Now, the federal level, Federal Labor got rid of the federal one. Why bring in a state construction watchdog amid all this housing activity and activity?
Because major projects in Victoria hasn't worked. We've seen a lot of major projects come on board. There's a $38 billion blowout in some of our major projects that we know of now. We've got, as I mentioned, just with the suburban rail loop, that's already costed with an additional $16 billion blowout before it's even had it shoveled in the ground. And so with these blowouts, we've got to be able to wrestle down many of those costs. The Australian Workers' Union was the whistleblower, and when you've got a union as a whistleblower to effectively say that the type of behaviour on our work sites here in Victoria is unprecedented, where you've got the kinds of things of ghost shifts, you've got people that are bullying, intimidation on the workplace, and the government kind of turns their hands up and says, we're not going to do anything about it. Well, what happens if the government turns their back, which Jacinda Allen and Daniel Andrews prior was doing, is it means the taxpayers pay for this. So we've got to get fair value for our major projects. And because if you look at on a work site, if you've got a worker being paid $200,000 on a work site in a major build or in a big build versus on a home to actually be a chippy on a home, where are they going to go? That's why we're not getting a housing stock here in Victoria, because they're all going into the big build and we don't have labour to be able to go in, carpenters and builders to go into projects in housing.
Just very quickly, there was a demonstration in Melbourne last night, a pro-Palestinian demonstration. Traffic was stopped.
Yeah.
Are you concerned by, I mean, we do see these weekly, but the one last night going into Easter long weekend, what concerns do you have about that one?
Out of control. So Victoria's become a lawless state when it comes to these protests. The Chief Commissioner called us the protest capital of the world. I'm all for protesting, but when they shut down cities like we've seen just overnight, we've got to do more than that. Yeah. We need move-on laws. We need stronger laws. People should be able to protest, but not shut down a city like we've seen happen time and time again.
This protest we're seeing on the screen now, like have it in the square but not on the road, is that what you're saying?
Well, it's a slippery slope. You know, they've been protesting at the State Library and at Parliament, and
they're allowed to, though,
and which is a public place, and it's not holding up any traffic or anything like that. Last night they decided, well, we'll go outside Flinders Street and shut down the major intersection in the city, and do a sit-in, which effectively what they did, and took over the city for a couple of hours. I mean, where does it stop? And if the police don't actually step in and say enough is enough, then it's just going to continue to roll on.
Yeah.
The businesses in Melbourne CBD are absolutely struggling at the moment because these protesters are effectively going in, week out, shutting down the city with no consequences. I think times come where we've got to have stricter rules around when these things happen, and particularly when they shut down a city, shut down public transport. They shouldn't be allowed to do that.
David Southwick, Deputy Liberal Leader in Victoria, really appreciate you coming in this Good Friday. I hope you have a happy Easter with your family.
Happy Easter to you and happy Easter to all the viewers.
Yes, good on you. David Southwick there, joining us live here in our Melbourne studio.